Okay, Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin. It is his first published work, published in 1953. I think it's one of the saddest, most raw accounts of life that Baldwin provides us with. So, I'm not going to ramble, I'll be quick. It is set around a young man, really a boy, called John Grimes. We meet him on the morning of his 14th birthday. He's struggling with faith, a quite brutal father with his own secrets, who's a preacher, and the daily struggles of life in Harlem in what is the mid-20th century. So the basic plot is this. John is struggling with that faith, and not really faith at first. He's struggling with life. He's struggling with a family that doesn't seem to care about him, that doesn't seem to care about his birthday. On his birthday. Relatable for some people, I'm sure, but the story gets much less relatable, in a good way. We go from John to the presence that looms over the whole book, and over John the whole book, which is his father Gabriel. And through Gabriel we explore the life of essentially somebody who has lived through the worst times in the US for a black person. Guess who Gabriel, born in the South, grows up to single mother. He, along with his sister Florence, who plays a role in this book as the aunt of John, he marries. After some wilderness in his youth, becomes a preacher, but cheats on his wife, impregnates his mistress, sends the mistress away. His son returns from that mistress and is killed. After this, he leaves the South, leaves behind a dead mistress, dead wife, dead son, all of these memories, and a dead mother, to move into New York, which is where he meets Elizabeth, which is John's mother. Now, Elizabeth has already had John by the time that Gabriel meets her, so he marries her and promises to raise John. They have other children, a big household, and that's where we find John on the eve and commencing of his 14th birthday, with these other children that he rightfully sees as his siblings. But there's a difference. His father clearly has hatred in his heart for John. We're never quite sure if this is just because he's a son of someone else, which is quite a normal thing, or if it's because there's something in particular that Gabriel sees in John. And consistently James Baldwin describes John, through Gabriel's eyes, as a child of the devil, not of God. So there's real hatred for his own son that drives the story. Now, John is struggling with his faith, but eventually, after his Aunt Florence has arrived and confesses her faith, which she has resisted her whole life because of Gabriel, John finds the strength to do the same thing, ultimately standing up to his father. It's a broad overview, but that's kind of what happens. It's told through a lot of flashbacks, a lot of history, exploring these people's lives. So the real story of John in the present day is actually quite slim. It's not the whole entirety of the book. Now, theme-wise, as you could guess, religion plays an absolutely central role in the story. It's each part, so the book is split into, I think it's 3 parts, begins with verses of the Bible. The whole story is built around the influence of religion. Most of all, Gabriel is built around religion, and so John's life, dictated by his father, is also dictated by religion. The story is set within the church. I mean, the ultimate culmination is within the church. Even when they are at home, they do not leave the church, because as I said, Gabriel is a preacher, and John cannot escape religion, fundamentally. But this is the key point of the book, is religion seen through the eyes of Gabriel, a domineering father, who for John is just brutal, and that's kind of the pain that you feel within the book, that there's this thing that John has grown up being told is all-encompassing, is beautiful, is meant to bring salvation, but he only ever sees it from a perspective, up until the end, of a father who hates him, who uses that religion as a reason to hate him. There's also an aspect to which the religious theme is so interesting, not just because of the exploration of pain that it brings for John in the story, as well as the exploration of religion in general. It's the personal nature of it. So Baldwin, his father is religious, and he has a childhood where he was a preacher in his early teens, at 14. So there is a degree to which this his first published work is really quite an honest exploration. Obviously, it's not word for word his life, it's not autobiographical, but it's set in the Harlem of the 30s that Baldwin grew up in. It's set around the religion that he centers his early life around, and even there are hints at something else that he will center his life around, which is why I think it's a mistake to pigeonhole this book. Even though the title suggests it is fundamentally a commentary on religion, to leave it at that is a massive simplification, because there's so many other things. So, race plays a massive role in the story, not quite as much as in some of the other books of Baldwin's, other essays of Baldwin's, particularly Notes of a Native Son, but still very significant, particularly for John. Gabriel, as you can guess from his background in the South, raised with an incredible hatred for white people. John, not quite understanding of it, which is an interesting dynamic to have John set up against that hatred, given Baldwin's controversial nature at the time as a writer, as a thinker on this issue. So that's quite interesting in itself that this is his first work, and it's incredibly nuanced on the issue. And I think the most interesting part is the way the story is crafted to explore this issue, because the story is built around the lives of the adults around John, so we see their memories, their pasts. So, history, and the history of race and of religion for this community that Baldwin himself was a part of, is a part of this book. And I think it's not only a part of this book, history is a part of the pain of this book. And when you listen to Baldwin speak separate from it, you can hear how much history to him is a history of pain. And for this family around John, it's a history of pain. From Elizabeth to Gabriel, all of the dead people that they left behind, history is fundamentally a tragic history. And for John, the pressure of that history is incredible. And it's that pressure of history, of the lives of his family, that are so difficult for him to grapple with, and which we see him try and grapple with. I think it's most interesting because Baldwin is clearly trying to create the sense, and does successfully create the sense, that John is cursed by this past that's outside of his control. And it leaves you wondering, did Baldwin feel that way? Did he feel that the history was weighing on him to write, to speak in the way that he does? But it's not only history on a grand scale, it's history on a personal scale, which is that of Gabriel's youth. He has a messy youth, he has mistresses, he has a child out of wedlock, he fights regularly and drinks. He is not the sort of person you may perceive as a preacher, but for Baldwin, he's the sort of person that makes sense as a preacher. He's a flawed person. And John's history is built upon his father's history, and there's no escaping that. Okay, as well as religion and race, there's some other interesting themes that I think are maybe talked about less. So, Baldwin, a gay man. This book does not explore that in the same way something like Giovanni's Room does in a much greater extent, but there are moments. So there are very intense descriptions of a church attendant called Elisha. And I think when you read those, John is admiring Elisha, and he talks about, there's regular descriptions of Elisha's body after playing basketball, or how successful he is, how much John admires him. And you think, this could be quite a significant allusion to homosexuality that Baldwin is not maybe ready to explore yet, not given permission by publishing to explore yet, but the theme is there within the book, even though it's not explored in quite the same way. The real thing that makes this book stand out, though, I think that's not maybe talked about as much as the religious issue, is that of the people that are struggling around central characters, particularly women. So, Elizabeth, which is Gabriel's second wife, John's mother, states on page 55 that I don't know how in the world you expect me to run this house and look after these children. Keep running around the block after Roy, John's sibling. This comes right after Roy has been stabbed in a fight with white boys, and Gabriel basically goes ballistic. But the key thing is here, Gabriel expresses verbally his anger against the world, against white people, but he takes out his anger on his children and his wife, Elizabeth. her patience in the face of Gabriel, a man that's meant to be her husband, meant to be a preacher, is pretty incredible, and her patience in the face of Gabriel's hate for John, his own son, is pretty incredible. We see that with Florence as well. So that's Gabriel's sister, John's aunt, who sends a letter describing Gabriel's practice of cheating on his wife, who seeks to help Elizabeth at every turn. There is a feeling that you get throughout the book that these people around Gabriel are merely trying their best, that these people are religious in the same way, but they're not as open about it. So Florence does not go to church in the same way as Gabriel does, but there's clearly a sense in the book that she has a moral fibre that Gabriel does not. I think that's a really interesting exploration, do these women in particular in this book have more morals than Gabriel, who's purported by himself to be the moral centre of the story? And I think Baldwin does a very good job of exploring that, of exploring the idea that maybe the person who shouts the loudest that they are most holy, is not the most holy or not the most moral. And maybe those are different things. So I think there's a very interesting, idea there that Baldwin explores that maybe isn't explored quite the same way in some of his other books, but it is done really well here. Most of all, it's good because it is nuanced. It's a very impressive story about religion, particularly for someone who has so many reasons to be pessimistic, nihilistic, gloomy, just scathing about religion. And this book is at times, but I think what you see is a nuanced take that explores how people exploit religion. And I think Baldwin fundamentally realises and paints the picture for us of how people like Gabriel use religion as a crutch, how domineering people will use any power structure as a crutch, as a method, as a tool to hurt those around them, to hurt their own children, to hurt their own family, to hurt random people. I think he recognises the issue with this power structure, and Baldwin disassembles it through this very personal story in a very digestible, very easy, very understandable way, and that's what makes it so good. Most of all, though, this story is a good read because there's hope. I think John is fundamentally the embodiment of hope in this story. He's the embodiment of hope for everyone in his life, who always tells him that everyone in his life always says, you're going to be this, you're going to be that, you're going to be this preacher, you're going to be this prophet, you're going to be this. And he doesn't feel like he's up to it. But at the very end, he finds strength outside of his father, outside of rage against his father, independent strength. Now, there's no saying that Baldwin thinks that's real, but he thinks it's valuable, clearly. And I think there is a degree to which, yes, the hope and this love that John embodies in the story is what Baldwin is seeking to portray most of all. That there is sort of light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, within the story, not within a religious sense, because that's much more complicated. And this hope, I think, is best summed up by the only passage in the book that includes the title. I've checked it again and again. The only one that includes the title, which is an allusion to a very famous African-American song, Go Tell It on the Mountain. And it comes quite an interesting spot, so 200 pages into the book. It's not quite at the end, and it's at a scene when Elizabeth is first meeting Gabriel with her young son John at the dinner table. I think it shows again the degree to which Baldwin sees Elizabeth and the people around Gabriel as the fundamental heroes of this story. Her journey is the one that sums up the message he's trying to portray through the book. And the quote is, "She who had descended with such joy and pain had begun her upward climb, upward with her baby, on the steep, steep side of the mountain." It's the only time the title is referenced, and it's referenced in relation to Elizabeth and her son. And it's not simple either. This hope is coming from meeting Gabriel. She doesn't yet know what he's going to do. But it works out in the end. And I think when you look back on something like that, these middle sections of the book, it's easy in the depths of Gabriel's rage in the book and John's despair to get a quite gloomy sense of the world. But ultimately, when you read it back, with the ending, Baldwin gives you a strong sense of hope. The idea of this mountain that can be climbed, that can be overcome no matter how steep it is quite a beautiful ending, quite a beautiful message for the book that comes through when you look at it again. So, that is Go Tell It on the Mountain, James Baldwin. Very good. I've yapped for way too long now, so that's enough.